I'd like to welcome everyone. This is Meet the Articles, which is one of our signature annual forums here for the Civic League. Our aim today is for you, our attendees and viewers, to be better informed at annual town meeting on May 2nd. The Civic League has had a volunteer team patiently culling through the articles on the town warrant. They've identified a small number to focus on here today. These are warrant articles that reflect the most important issues we face. For citizen articles, you'll hear the proponent's perspective along with alternative perspectives to inform you. We've had to make one necessary last-minute change. We decided to reschedule the short-term rental panel discussion that we had anticipated having to a later date. We're developing an expanded format for this important issue, which we believe will work well in a different venue. You'll get more information about this once we've finalized the format. Let me now introduce Lee Saperstein, the moderator of today's forum. Lee?
Peter, thank you. As Peter said, I'm Lee Saperstein, Vice President of the Civic League and participant in several other town committees. My job will be merely kind of a gatekeeper and timekeeper. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking. We've got panelists who will. However, I will remind everybody who's attending, both participants and attendees, or panelists and attendees, that the town warrant, the complete town warrant has been mailed out. And so what the proponent proposed and what the Select Board, Finance Committee, or Planning Board offers as the actual motion to be discussed. It's over 100 pages, happy reading. Now, one other thing before we start with our panelists, there are segments of this presentation today that says questions and answers. I will ask everybody who wants to ask a question to use the electronic button. It's down at the bottom of your screen. On mine, it says raise hand. It's second from the right. And if you click on it, watch. You'll notice that on my icon or my little thumbnail, there's a raised hand. When I'm done, I just click again and it goes away. With that, both Ryan at NCTV and I will be able to see that you're interested in questioning, and we should call on, or we should be able to call on you. And that applies to both the panelists and the attendees. And by the way, folks, according to the list, we have 14 panelists. Yes, those are the people on the agenda, and 27 attendees. And to the attendees, thank you for attending. By the way, if there are questions that don't get answered or things that you want to know more about, the Civic League has got a website, nantucketcivicleague.com, C-O-M, and just throw your questions at us and we'll try and answer them as speedily as we can. And so, Peter, unless you have any other last minute thoughts, I'm going to ask Ryan to throw up the second screen share. Ryan? Yes. Annual town meeting is the authority for running the town. And the first element of town meeting is to pay the bills, which are, of course, our appropriations, and it says appropriation in capital articles. It would be the recurring appropriations, such as the town budget, and then the specific single items for purchasing anything that's described as capital. With that, yes, we're going to go back, and I'm going to introduce the three people who will be going over those. And by the way, they're staying on for questions and answers. Denise Cronau is chair of our finance committee. Denise, thank you. I know you're volunteering, and the pay is a smile. And then Brian Turbot, our finance director, and Rick Sears, assistant finance director. And so I'm going to hand it over to Denise, who will manage the next 25 minutes.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Peter, and to the Civic League for having us. It's always very helpful for us to be able to talk about, as Lee had pointed out, how important it is for people to be informed when they come to town meeting about the articles in front of them and be able to make an informed vote. So from this, I'm actually going to start the process by turning it over to Brian, and then I'll jump in after Brian and Rick, because the process actually starts with town administration.
First of all, thank you to Lee and Peter and the Civic League for putting this together and having us. And thank you, Denise. So I think what we were going to talk today was a primary focus, because there's so many of them this year, is on the capital articles. I think we were going to focus on the individual articles between articles number 11 through 20, and also highlight the process that the town uses that is also used for articles 10 and 22. And our assistant director of municipal finance, who focuses mainly on capital and works with the capital program committee extensively throughout the year, Rick Sears, is going to start by highlighting and overviewing articles 10 and 22, which are the main capital articles. And then we'll take you through all the individual debt exclusion articles with a brief explanation of them. And then Denise will explain how the FinCom comes to their recommendations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rick to start the presentation.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. So Article 10 represents the general fund requests for capital, and capital in the town of Nantucket is defined as equipment, buildings, roads, all in excess of $50,000 in the useful life of greater than 5 years. And so what we typically find in Article 10 is requests for vehicles, for funds for facilities work, for fire department equipment, school requests, largely for, well, in this year, of course, we have the athletic fields, but we also, which is not in Article 10, but also maintenance at the schools and the like. And so the total for Article 10 this year is just under $16,500,000. There's approximately 12 vehicles. The school, as I said, has annual allocations that they look for maintaining the roofs and building improvements. Because the town staff has grown a little bit, we have some new vehicles, but typically speaking, it's replacement vehicles. The fire department has a replacement ambulance, which is kind of a big ticket item, for $370,000. Each year we have 4 or 5 standing requests for IT, for things like replacing town computers, and this year we add to that the GIS digital update. And town administration has some some special projects around coastal resiliency. There's $1 million in Article 10 for coastal resiliency. There is $1.5 million for the continuing work on the Baxter Road solution. And there is another $500,000 for for employee housing study, and $500,000 for a study for the new senior center, assuming we move our island home. So those are sort of the highlights. There's also $1,625,000 in Article 10 for affordable housing. So Brian, do you want to go to 11? I'll pick up 22 at the end, or you want me to go straight to
No,
22?
we can do that. So Article 11, which is an individual debt exclusion, is a request by the town to appropriate $8.5 million, which would be for the design, first of all, would be for procurement of the owner's project management manager services, which we are required to have on a building project of this size. It also includes the procurement for the estimated cost for a design and architectural firm to design the new facility. It includes all the costs ancillary to that, including bidding services and then construction services after, should we be successful in getting an allocation to develop and build a new island home. The article does ask for the facility to be able to be located at 40 Sherburne Commons Way. This has been a long process from the last time that we have done this, and we did work with an additional design, architectural, and consulting firm who did recommend that we move the facility, that it was the best alternative. So the town in Article 11 is asking for $8.5 million for the design, OPM, bidding, and construction services. The estimated cost of the facility is $50 million at this point in time. Article 12 is another debt exclusion question. It's important to note that all of the articles that we're discussing right now, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, are all debt exclusion questions, which require a successful 2/3 majority vote at the annual town meeting to authorize the borrowing, and then a majority vote at the ballot to authorize the town to exclude the debt from the limits of Proposition 2.5. So all of these questions that we are presenting today that we're presenting right now, do have a two-part process that they need to clear in order to be able to be the projects to begin. Article 12 is for the supplemental appropriation for the replacement of the Harbor Master building. We currently have approximately $3.1 million allocated. Of that $3.1 million, $1 million is a grant from the state, which we still do have. Even though the bids came in slightly higher, much higher, I should say, than we expected. The low bid was $4.8 million, which left us with a deficit in the project of just under $1.8 million. We are requesting $2 million as a supplemental appropriation to be able to complete that project. Article 13 is for reconstruction Pleasant Street and sidewalk repaving and reconstruction in the amount of $2 million. That's a very important thoroughfare in the town. It gets a high degree of traffic, and we've undertaken some reviews and some initial cost estimates to redesign or repave and reconstruct the sidewalks on Pleasant Street. And so we're asking for a $2 million appropriation to be able to undertake and complete that project. Article 14 is for the Loran Barracks repairs. Well, the Loran Barracks generally house all of the CSOs for the summer. So we did start some repairs, approximately a year and a half ago. There was a $950,000 allocation to begin the work. We've hired a company called SMRT to review the additional work to repair and renovate the Loran Barracks and update them. And that work is estimated at $4.5 million. And I will have Rick kind of take everybody through what is in that, what the estimate includes for that work.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So there's two buildings out there. There's about 20 rooms for seasonal employees, and those two buildings are over 50 years old and require quite a bit of work. The outside, as Brian had said, some of the exterior had been done in the past couple of years. They went to work to do some updating of mechanical and some other aspects of the interior. They found hazardous materials, asbestos and lead. So we need to mitigate that. And they also they found it also in the slab and in the interior walls. So all that has to be pulled out, which is why it's a $4.5 million number. And then they will also replace all of that, plus all the mechanical, and the building will meet code. And that's kind of the extent of the work. There's one wall that's on one of the two buildings that's compromised, and that needs to be repaired as well.
Article 15 is a request for an appropriation from the school department relative to the athletic facilities. This article originally started out at a little over $16 million, including turf fields. The turf fields have been removed from the request this year from the town meeting. The new request is for $5.6 million, which is for the reconstruction and movement of the baseball fields and the installation of tennis courts. So they're asking for $5.6 million. They've split the original $16 or $17 million project into two phases as they review the need for turf fields or what to do with the remainder of the athletic fields. Article 16 is a request for $6 million by town administration for OPM design, bidding, construction services for the design of a central municipal office facility. The goal here is to be able to consolidate all of the offices in the town onto one location at the two fairgrounds, the Plus site. This has been something that has been talked about and was discussed at a previous town meeting about doing, and we are running out of space, and we believe that a new facility is needed in order to accommodate the growth in the town and to house all of the employees. That was Article 16, excuse me. Article 17 is a request for $8.5 million for the construction of town employee housing. The intent of this article is to construct one, potentially two, depending on how the bids turn out, dormitory style housing complexes at the public safety facility site in the back. We have a large need for seasonal employees. The Loran Barracks primarily houses all the CSOs, and all of the lifeguards are scattered around in around the island in housing, as well as any other seasonal employees that the town hires for DPW or any of the other departments. We don't have enough housing to house all of the seasonal needs that we have, and this request would go a long way towards mitigating the shortage of places for the seasonal staff to live. We already have the OPM and the design firm for this engaged for the beginning phase of this. The intent is for this to be modular construction. There was an appropriation at last year's town meeting of $300,000, which we've used to hire the OPM and the initial design firm to begin the process. Bids are expected to go out shortly after town meeting if this is successful at town meeting in the ballot. Article 18 is a continuation of a prior appropriation for PFAS soil investigation. The town previously had allocated $750,000 and had been working with CDM Smith. This is a request for an appropriation of $2 million to continue the investigation and decision-making process on what to do with the PFAS issue that everybody has been talking about recently. So it's a continuation of this investigation process that we have already started. Article 19 is a real estate appropriation article for the acquisition of 10 to 12 Washington Street, where the Greenhound building, in the amount of $4,750,000. Excuse me. Article 20 was a request of the Affordable Housing Trust to the Select Board for an appropriation to continue the work that they're doing to try to meet the 10% of the shy list, as well as to construct or purchase or acquire additional properties or structures to continue the work of providing affordable housing to the workers on the island. This request is $10 million this year. There was an allocation last year. This is a continuation. They received a positive vote for a $6.5 million allocation. This year, they're asking for an additional $10 million to continue those efforts. They do have a couple parcels of land that they will be putting out to bid for development of, and this is this money will be used as a continuation of those projects. And Article 21 actually is Enterprise Fund Operations, Rich. So we're into Article 22, which is capital at this point.
Okay, so Article 22 is like Article 10, except for Article 22 is for the enterprise funds as opposed to the general fund. Between Article 10 the articles Brian just described to you and what's in Article 22, that comprises the 91 capital requests for the year. Article 22, the total request is $32 million, of which $22 million is airport related. And of the airport $22 million, $17 million of it is for improvements that are reimbursed at around 95, generally speaking, at 95% between the FAA and Mass Department of Transportation. So just beginning with the airport, so the $17 million that generally speaking gets is reimbursable is for a new airport layout plan, or the continuation of the upgrading of the airport layout plan, reconstruction of runway 624, a new commuter apron reconstruction, terminal improvements, airport rescue and firefighting truck, and a master plan update. So that's those comprise $17 million and likely to be reimbursable there. The airport also has a little over $1 million for costs associated with building some employee housing. This is the design and engineering and owner's project management phase. If we are successful and get a good design, there'll be an additional request next year for the actual construction. The airport always has some replacement vehicles, about $390,000 this year. And then they also have some IT upgrades for about $150,000 and a few other items, including reconstruction, a little over $1 million for reconstruction of hard stands. So JetBlue is changing the equipment they're going to use to fly to Nantucket. So we need to make some adjustments to how we park them. Also in Article 22 is the water department, who has just a small, a request for $200,000. That's to run a water main extension from Sun Island Road out to Delta and Nobody playing fields to improve both the irrigation and the water, of course, that comes to the concession stand out there. There's one request for our Island Home, which is for a new generator and a shed for $145,000. Solid Waste has about 12 requests this year across a variety of both replacing a vehicle, monies to fix the roof, which has rather gaping holes in it, upgrading the sorting station, which has never been upgraded, upgrading the bathrooms out there, and then also doing some work on the TL, on the take it or leave it. That needs new roofing and siding and some fencing. And then there's some perimeter fencing out at solid waste facility as well. And then finally, sewer. The larger items for sewer are, they need to replace this supplemental funding for replacement of the membranes. The membranes are about 9 years old. They have a lifespan of about 6 or 7 years. They definitely need to be replaced. That's item number one for David Gray. There's also each year you've seen recently, you've seen $2 million for something we call CMOM, which is Capacity Management Operations and Maintenance. That was a mandatory program. We've come out from underneath the consent order, but we want to continue work along those lines because there's still work to be done. And then finally, there's $2.5 million for PFAS, a pilot program for PFAS removal and treatment out at Surfside Wastewater Treatment Center. And the total of all that is the $32,400,000. That is the summary for Article 22.
Thank you, Rick. And Lee, I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to bring us in at 1:30 as planned so we can open it up to questions. So what I'd like to do now is kind of give you Finance Committee by the numbers. Finance Committee has 9 members. They're appointed by the Select Board. Starting in September, we have our preliminary general fund budget review with town administration, and that's really where we start all our work in advance of making recommendations on all the warrant articles. This year, as you all know, there are 107 warrant articles, and the Finance Committee's, I would suggest, main charter is to make a recommendation to the voters as to how each one of these articles should be voted, with the exception of the zoning articles, and those are recommended by the Planning Board. And so the Finance Committee will review those recommendations by the Planning Board, and I would offer 99 times out of 100 endorse what the Planning Board's recommendation is. We had our first public hearing on the warrant articles on December 9th, and we had a second one on February 8th. We have 20 review meetings of all the warrant articles. And in addition to that, I think something that's quite interesting for everyone to know is that the Capital Program Committee, so we've just heard Rick tell us about what the capital is, but the Capital Program Committee has 25 meetings starting in August in order to come up to their recommendations. So for example, Jill Veith, who's on the Finance Committee, is our permanent member to the Capital Program Committee. And so she's attending 45 meetings in respect of the warrant articles. We also have Joanna Roche on the Finance Committee, who is a member of the Contract Review Committee, which is under the Health and Human Services warrant article number 9, which allocates town funds to different nonprofits on the island. We also have two joint meetings, one in November and one again in March, with the Select Board and the Capital Committee to talk about the articles that, why did the Finance Committee make the motions they make? When you think about it, 107 articles over 40 hours of meetings, it seems feasible, but some of our articles we will have spent 1 or 2 hours on a single article. So it really just depends on what the topic is, the participation by the public. And whilst there is very little I can say that's beneficial about COVID, I would suggest Zoom has been in terms of public engagement with reviewing the articles, with having the public be able to participate from wherever they are. And we had one meeting last year, I think we had 350 participants, which I'm sure is a record for a Finance Committee meeting. Fascinating though that they are, we don't always get a lot of people showing up at them. So yeah, and last year we had 112 articles, this year 107. Nantucket is a community that's very engaged civically and puts a lot of things forward for the voters to know and discuss. And so with that, I will, and we work very closely with obviously town administration, with Brian and his team, with Libby and her team, and all the different departments. We hold a half-day long budget review of all the departments. So we're very engaged. And just, to kind of finish with some numbers, our overall budget this year is 104 million. Our capital is, spending is in excess of $50 million. The debt exclusions that will be asked to vote on as voters is in excess of $50 million. So it's a significant figure for us as a community, and it's important that everyone understands what and why they're voting for it, because it's what makes, every voice being heard is what makes us a community that's richer for everyone's participation. And with that, I see it's 1:30. Lee, back over to you.
Denise, thank you. I just want to make a very positive comment that the town of Nantucket and its financial side of the administration are getting outside very positive reviews from the state. I have to admit, I'm not absolutely certain which awards we've got, but Brian should take a certain amount of pride for the fact that Nantucket is viewed positively in Boston. And with that, let's see if there are any questions. Remember, to ask a question, go to the bottom of your screen where it says raise hand and left click once, and there should be a yellow hand. I'll show you how it's done. See the yellow hand on my picture? Click again and it goes away. And I will be able to see if somebody's raising their hand, as will Ryan from NCTV. Folks, if there are no questions, that means everybody did such a good job.
Lee, I got my hand raised. Peter,
All right, Peter.
I
So you
wanted to-
do it.
I wanted to be at the end of the line, and I wanted to ask a kind of a general question, not specifically about the budget, but it has to do with the difficulty of the town being able, for institutional reasons, because it is a town, to be as agile as one might be as an investor. And I'll use as an example the anecdote that I heard about the airport. And as I understand it, the FAA contacts us and says, your number came up, we're ready to spend $10 million on putting in that new runway, and we're gonna pony up 9 million of it. Have you got the 1 million ready to go? And could you tell us in 2 weeks if the answer is yes or no? That kind of grinds things to a halt from your standpoint. But I'm wondering, how are we positioned to deal with the possibility that there will be more than just the FAA knocking on our door saying, for example, the Biden administration has now emphasized dealing with broadband in rural areas. And we would like to help you provide broadband for all of the rural residents of Nantucket. We are a rural area, thank God. Some of us rural folks are in fact underserved. And I wonder, how do you handle something like that? Do you call it, do you set up a dummy enterprise fund? I mean, I think of it as, I have a home equity line of credit as an individual. How can the town set up a situation so that they can respond to what might be a modest tidal wave of federal co-funding that could become available in the next 12 to 18 months?
Brian, I think that's on you. You're muted.
That's a really great question, Peter, and certainly the airport example is probably a good one. It has happened probably once or twice before that there's been additional funds that because of the way we're set up and structured and have to, in the form of government being an annual town meeting, it certainly does make it a challenge to do. I think we've been able to successfully manage the vast majority of those through with the airport. They're the ones that really come to mind. The AIP process for the airport is usually completed in May. So by the time we get to town meeting, the airport has a pretty good idea of what their funding is going to be. In reference to all of this additional capital money that is available, we've been inundated the last couple of weeks with all of the application processes and what available funding may be spread out across the various categories, and certainly broadband is one of them. I don't think that there's an easy answer, to be honest with you. I think that what we have to do, or we do in most of these situations, is review those grant opportunities, and certainly if we have funding in the budget to potentially cover a 5% commitment or something, we could look to do it. But large scale commitments, certainly given the way entities operate or communities operate through the annual town meeting process, certainly puts us at a disadvantage in order to do it. One possible method that we could look at, and I'm not suggesting that this is something we would do on an everyday basis, but the town does allocate money to a reserve fund, which can be used for unforeseen and unanticipated expenditures. But there would have to, and that is only available to be used with the the affirmative vote, of the finance committee. So it'd be something that we would have to have a long discussion with them on, and I'm not entirely sure whether we would consider it or not, but it is an option. Other than that, again, as you referenced, the way that we're set up, it certainly does put us at a disadvantage because we can't just store large amounts of taxpayer funds to hopefully use on grants that we don't know that if we'll get or will come forward. So it certainly is difficult, and there's probably been opportunities that may have gone by the wayside because of the way we operate. But we certainly review them and look to see if we have spending authorizations that potentially are in line with the grants to do if we can. So we do try to turn over and look under every rock and every pebble that we have if there's a grant opportunity that we may want to take advantage of or gets presented to us. But there's no easy answer that says we can just go borrow money or do something like that to make it happen. It's town meeting is the appropriating and authority to authorize the expenditure of funds, and we need their votes to do it.
Thank you, Brian. Peter didn't introduce his qualifications to ask this question. Peter spent a career as a research demographer, which is demos means the people and graph is a picture. So he studied people and how they distribute themselves. But Peter is also a retired ramp agent at the airport. You may have been greeted by Peter as he helped you load your luggage onto one of the planes. Peter, I think you've retired now from that, but it gave you a close-up view of the airport.
It did, Lee. And if I could just tell you one more thing about this, I fully sympathize with the situation that the town is in, Brian. And I guess maybe Denise can say whatever she might say about this. I'll make an observation about how this problem is handled in academia. Academia, the most well-endowed universities will have a bunch of things that are called, enterprises that are called things like the Institute for the Absorption of Federal Funds. They stand ready to receive any offer from the federal government to fund anything that's co-shared, and they somehow deal with it bureaucratically. And I see that there's no way for the town to do that. I'm just wondering if there are ways that we can at least be positioned to say, when the time comes to submit a grant, do we have a grant writer who can jump on this, submit a grant and say, we would stand ready to spend $1 million if you'd give us 10 million to upgrade broadband or to connect with the electric cable that's going from the wind turbines to the Cape. We'd like to plug into that too, and we'll pony up some money. I don't know how you handle it. But Tom, people who attend town meeting ought to be aware that, we need to think smart about opportunities like this, however that can be done.
Thank you, Peter. I do not see any other hands.
Lee, Rick Atherton has his hand up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And why didn't it go to the top of my screen? Rick, it's on you. Rick, are you muted?
I see the unmute sign now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just had a question about the Marine Department building on Washington Street, the proposal, and want to ask if it's been designed with consideration of the sea level rise scenario that the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee has recommended be adopted by the town, and also that it takes into consideration the potential raising of the level of Washington Street as sea level rise continues, and how those impact the position of that building and whether or not it might be reconfigured and built in a way to sort of disassemble and keep a boat building on the harbor side of Washington Street and the more administrative and comfort facilities built across the street. Thank you.
Brian, Rick, have you got any input on that?
I believe that in reference to the coastal resiliency recommendations, that those were factored into the design and most likely were part of the increased cost. As to the question about whether it was designed with the potential for the raising of the road, I we would have to get back to the Civic League with the answer on that, because I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I think
Brian, if I may, Harbor Master Lucy made a presentation to the Nantucket Town Association where she discussed some of the potential for locating the building, for upgrading the building. And she pointed out that the building is used as the welcoming center for the travelers on the coastal cruise lines.
Mhm.
And that very often they get off the launch looking for the restrooms, for the facilities, which is, in her mind, why she didn't want to put that part of it across the street. That I can't really speak for her, but it has been thought about, Rick. And Denise, I think you know that Rick Atherton was a predecessor of yours as chair of the Finance Committee.
Yes, I do. Also, too, from our discussion of this, we asked actually the same question. I guess it runs in Finance Committee genes, that during the review, and we reviewed it, and it has been designed with an anticipation of sea level rise. So the new improvements are reflecting that. To Brian's, and to just second Brian's point, we didn't discuss the road at the time we discussed the building itself. So.
Thank you. I do not see any more hands. I am double checking the participants list. So once again, I'd like to give a very warm and hearty thank you to Denise, Brian, and Rick for their presentation. I think that Nantucket does well, and I hope that we can see these improvements in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Denise has to go. If there are any additional questions, send them to her at the email address for the Finance Committee or to us at Nantucket Civic League. And I'd like to turn now to 3 sets of articles for that were submitted by citizens. And we're going to start with Articles 54 and 55. And Dewis will start us off. Henry Terry will give us a review of a survey. And Jesse Dutra will respond. Yes, it's the next screen, please. There we go. And Dewis, the proponent for Articles 54, 55, Henry Terry, to comment on a survey that was administered, and Jesse Dutra, who is an operator building and installing these installations. So let's put the screen down and give the opportunity to Ann.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Peter and Lee, for having me and for hosting this forum. Also, I'd like to offer kudos to the Nantucket Civic League for its efforts to engage Nantucketers in the governance of our town. We are a community, and this helps us stay a community. What are my articles about? Article 54 is simple. It prohibits hot tubs and spas from the historic districts in Nantucket and Sconset, the same way pools have been prohibited since 2011. Article 55 reduces the maximum allowable size of hot tubs and spas to 64 square feet, or 8 feet by 8 feet, and adds a volume limit of 1,000 gallons. It is relevant only in the case that 54 does not pass muster with the voters. Why is this necessary? Why am I doing this? Pools and hot tubs, large hot tubs and spas, are issues in dense neighborhoods. The list of nuisances associated with them is well known. They present a particular problem in our historic districts because to be approved, they must be invisible. That means tall fences, tall, dense hedges, and other screening devices that destroy what makes our historic districts so charming and appealing to residents and visitors alike. The openness that invites strollers to look over the picket fence and enjoy the historic homes and gardens on the other side. Initially, my idea was to make what is currently allowed smaller, but still reasonable. But when I presented to organizations like Nantucket Town Association, the HDC, the Nantucket Historical Commission, and others, the message I got was loud and it was clear. Hot tubs and spas should not be allowed at all in the historic districts. The recent survey, about which you will hear more from Henry Terry, bears this out unequivocally. Hence, 2 articles, one to ban, 54, and one to limit size, 55, if voters do not accept a ban. The size I'm proposing in Article 55 is in deference to my fellow panel member, Jesse Dutra. When I presented to the HDC, Jesse made the case that my original proposed size of 36 square feet was too small and 64 would work. As for the 1,000-gallon volume limit, that was the limit that was set in 2011 by annual town meeting voters. I was shocked to learn, and I think you will be too, that this volume limit was simply left out of a new definition of hot tub spa included in an obscure technical amendment article in the 2017 special town meeting warrant. As a result, we have plunge pools that hold several thousand gallons of water cropping up in our cherished old historic districts. Hot tubs and spas are simply inappropriate in the old historic districts. Hence, I urge all Nantucket voters to support their in-town neighbors and vote yes on Article 54 to prohibit hot tubs and spas in our old historic districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next is Henry Terry. By the way, to Abigail Camp, I see that your hand is raised and we'll call on you after the presentations. Henry?
Thank you, Lee. The Nantucket Town Association is a member of the Civic League, conducted a survey of resident and non-resident property owners in the residential old historic zone of town and Sconset's old historic zone. Owners of record in the 2 zones were notified about the online survey by mail sent to the address of record for each property. The survey link was emailed to the mailing list of the NTA and Sconset Civic League. A survey link was published in Daybreak Nantucket. The link was publicly made available on Nantucket Town Association's website, and responses were collected from February 15th until March 15th. In order to ensure accurate results, respondents indicated their name and Nantucket address. 453 responses were recorded, 304 from the residential old historic, 97 from Sconset, 11 renters, and 41 who lived outside of the old historic districts but wanted to complete the survey anyway. Responses were overwhelmingly in favor of banning hot tubs and spas in the historic zones. 70% preferred no hot tubs or spas. Sconset's owners were slightly more inclined towards banning spas, with 72% wanting no hot tubs or spas versus 70% of ROH. Respondents who identified as year-round residents were more likely to be anti-spa, with 75% asking for a ban. Among people who rented out their residences, 67% asked for a ban on hot tubs and spas. Of respondents outside the ROH and SOH, a smaller but still majority percentage of 61% preferred a ban. 33 of all respondents believe that spas and hot tubs can have a therapeutic benefit for homeowners. However, most believe pools and spas create problems. The most common concerns were noise from use, 72%, mechanical noise, 61%, visual impacts, 62%, drainage and stormwater management, 61%, and privacy impacts, 58%. Light pollution and energy use were also concerns. Over half the respondents felt that landscape screening required to hide spas and hot tubs can create problems. It's 55%. 25% of the respondents were neutral. 79% of all respondents agree or strongly agreed that the hot tubs and spas are not compatible in the historic character of the ROH and SOH neighborhoods. And this is still up on our website, which is nantuckettownassociation.org, if anybody wants to review them. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Henry. And Jesse, I see you're online. I think you're muted and I think your camera was off, but if you unmute and open up your video, we'll get to see you because you're on.
Good to see you too. And thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to thank the Civic League for putting this presentation together. I think it's a good source of information for everyone to be able to get a better, clear understanding of what's going on at town meetings. So thank you very much. My name's Jesse Dutra. I'm a landscape and swimming pool contractor. I just wanted to first discuss the HDC meeting that Ms. Stewart's was mentioning, and I was open to the idea of eliminating the larger size of the spa due to people taking advantage of it and turning their spas into plunge pools. As long as it was a little bit bigger, because her original size was way too small for anyone of a large size to be able to use a spa. And I was surprised, and when the second article came out in that there was also a ban on spas as well. So having two articles, I think, is misleading, and it's kind of concerning to me that the public might be bait and switched on something like this. And articles like this should not be done by homeowners. They are biased and counterproductive. If you may recall, there were other articles that happened a few years ago, and there was a lot of backlash from those articles. I don't think the intentions are bad. I just think that there could be a lot of repercussions from articles that are being done by homeowners and people that are against the spa or pool. This should be done by a governing board. And the board who is going to be governing the article should be the board that does this. And that's why a lot of other of the boards, like the finance committee, if I'm not mistaken, and select board rejected this article, because it's coming from a homeowner that instead of a governing board. And I think the article itself could be a lot better. I think it's missing the big picture. And I also think that I wish there was a way that we could zone greed, but I also know as a builder of these, and a lot of my clientele, if not most, are not doing it for a rental purpose or doing it to flip a house or anything like this. They're doing it to have some outdoor use on their property. And the town, the district has a lot of different size lots. They're not just little tiny lots. There are large lots as well. So you could be restricting a lot that someone could be very much have no problem and no issues with any boards or neighbors, and they now can't have that because of this article. Um,
Yeah, Jesse, we're running a little over time, but I don't want to
Okay.
cut you off if you've got more additional
well,
important things to say.
I'll go right to the end of my stuff and skip a bunch. Sorry, I should have figured it would took longer. But, I just wanted to say, I'm a father of 3, and I know how important it is to get my children outside and to use the outdoors. And I think this is a very important aspect of that. And I find it disappointing that people use the excuse of noise with children and people playing. Children are going to be loud outside no matter what, whether there's a spa there or not. And we all were children at one time, and they are our future. And we should embrace that. And no matter what district they are in, they should be allowed to enjoy themselves.
Jesse, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
For those of you with questions, I'd like to deal with the next 2 articles, and then the schedule for the forum says that we'll do Q&A for all 3. Excuse me. And so I'd like to call on Joseph Minella to talk about Article 79. And Joseph, I've been following some of this, but it was only in the last comment in the paper where you shared what it is you do with the town. Could you let us know that as you move into Article 79?
Yeah. Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me. My name's Joseph Minella. I do work for the town for the Natural Resources Department. I am the hatchery technician there. I think I've made that very clear as possible as every time I've talked to one of these. I've explained that I do work for the town, but this is not a town initiative. This is just something, a personal thing that a problem that I saw that I wanted to try to correct. Unless, whether you want to admit it or not, our harbor is dying. Okay, it's getting taken over by a black algae called Ligbia. Okay, Ligbia is a microalgae that grows because of excessive nutrients in the water. One major source of excessive nutrients in the water is fertilizer. And yeah, so our harbor's dying. I'm trying to do something about it. We tried to ban fertilizer 25 years ago. Okay, 25 years ago in 1997, the planning board recommended that the island ban fertilizer, and we did not. So we've had this problem for 25 years now. And I think 2012, there were fertilizer regulations put in place that have, they haven't really done anything. They don't have an enforcement mechanism, and the problem has just gotten worse and worse and worse. We just ended scallop season on the brink of collapse. This is this week's paper. We got 3,000 something bushels, and every scalloper that you talk to says there's no habitat left in the harbor. It's a direct result of the Ligbia taking over, which is a direct result of fertilizer nutrients seeping into the water. The Land Council had a study done called Health Assessment for Eelgrass in Nantucket Harbor. And in their recommendations, they said, we recommend managers improve water quality within the harbor by reducing land-based pollutants and decreasing nutrient and sediment runoff, reducing or eliminating the use of fertilizer. So that's the science behind it. There's emotion behind it too. It's just sad that people can't see that the fertilizers are really ruining the harbor. I understand that there's a big economic driver for landscapers. I just feel like you can figure out a way to make a lawn green without putting a nutrient on it. I also, I totally understand land use, land rights and things like that, but you're putting something on your property that's not staying on your property, okay? If it was contained on your property, fine, do it. But you're putting something on your property that is then leaching into our harbor and ruining our harbor and our ponds too. So that's where I'm at. And yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah.
We have Marty Mcgowan, whom I've met on several occasions, and he's with the Wisconsin Gardener Landscape Organization. Marty, are you on board? I see your name Speak up.
I'm
Hi there.
here. Can I be heard?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity and of course the opportunity to address all in the community. I find the article extremely fascinating. I believe in the harbor and good health of Nantucket and have been making the practices 100% of my process for almost 50 years of landscaping in Nantucket. The Conservation Commission designed their fertilizer for establishing successful non-leaching programs based on recommendations that I had made to them. I am a member of the Landscape Association and practice strictly best practices. Originally in this program, the idea of best practices program, it was about helping the harbor and controlling things by controlling phosphorus. Now, I take annual soil samples of the roughly 80 properties that I maintain, and our phosphorus is at 0 or just above. All of my properties are at low levels. So the best practices has worked, and I have the paperwork to prove it. Now, I think that what's being said here is extremely important. We all want the harbor to be healthy and strong. I think that the education of the community to have all of their landscapers, there are 270 of them to my knowledge, and all people should be doing this. Equally said, the town has fostered and developed a landscape education program, which of course got dropped during COVID and needs to be reestablished, where they can support education and help everybody do a great job. I believe that this is the approach that we should take, because all of the processes that you've been going through today always started with the survey, and then hiring the professionals to do the study, hired by the design, and then followed by an action plan. So action plans are something that I believe in, and also good health. So I recommend not that we vote for this article at this time, not that we abandon this article in any way, but that we provide the community as a whole with the opportunity to solve the problem together while establishing safe practices and smart island-wide care. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. And now I find myself in a difficult position because as moderator, I should be neutral. And yet somebody pinned on me the role of final comments on fertilizer. To explain, it was a while back at town meeting when a ban was first proposed, according to Joseph, maybe second proposed. And then select board member Michael Kopko said, no, we need to put together a study committee. And that was the Article 68 work group of which I was secretary. And so that's why I'm making the comments. We had input from any number of people, UMass, which is the University of Massachusetts Marine Science Group in Dartmouth. And we had excellent presentations from University of Connecticut Extension Service, from University of Massachusetts Extension Service. We went through the EPA pages on nutrient contamination, and we came up with 2 items. The first was a set of suggested regulations, which, reviewed by town council and appropriately amended, is now part 75 of the Department of Health regulations, accessible on the town website. More significantly, over 60 pages of a manual of best management practices, which Marty has alluded to, was produced section by section on how best to feed your plants. let me eliminate one myth. It's nitrate, it's phosphate. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a synthetic product or a natural product. Some composts are richer in phosphate than a Nantucket applicable fertilizer, Nantucket compliant fertilizer. In essence, the best management practices says, give the plants what they need, no more, and give it to them when they can use it. Never before, never after. We're coming up to that date. It really has to do with what's the average date for, the average date. I'll start over again. What is the date at which the average soil temperature equals 55 degrees or better? Because that's when grass begins to grow healthily. We picked April 15th. There are some who said that's too soon. The average temperature doesn't get to be 55 until May, but it was generous. We say shut it down in October when it gets too cool. We say in the best management practices and in the regulations, put it down in small doses so it goes to the plant and not the groundwater. We heard of something called the agronomic threshold, which is the amount of fertilizer you can put down that never gets past the roots of the plant because they're absorbed. And then there's the environmental threshold. It's a little more generous. It's not just the plant roots, but what adheres to the grains of soil and doesn't get into the groundwater. All of that's been considered. However, we did leave it to the town on enforcement. And yes, I'm now speaking for myself because the Article 68 work group was dissolved long ago. We could probably do a better job on enforcement. There are both economic, financial, and legal reasons, one of which was stated very clearly. We do have enforcement officers, but without permission from the landowner, they may not go onto the ground and inspect. However, they can look over the bed of the pickup truck and see what's in it. In our Part 75 regulations, it says if you apply fertilizer commercially, you must have a license. If you have a license, you have to go through an education program. And so, Joseph, if you have anything more you want to say, I'm going to call on you in the question and answer period, because I think you deserve that opportunity. However, to try and stay on schedule, which we are now abusing, and it's not your fault. I think the 20 minutes for the three articles may have been just a little bit stingy. And so I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and say, I'm going to call on Steve Holgate and Kathleen Matthews on Article 101. And then when we go back to question and answer, any unresolved issues or any open questions, we'll deal with those. Okay? Steve Holgate, please.
Thank you. Thank you to the Civic League for hosting this forum. I represent the Nantucket Hunting Association. And just to clarify, the Article 101 is was implemented by the Select Board, so I'm not the sponsor of the article, but I am a strong proponent. Little bit of history. We had a similar article that was passed at town meeting back in 2004, giving permission of the selectmen to enter into a land lease for a parcel of land out behind the VFW hall, kind of east of the airport, next to the industrial park area. Nantucket Hunting Association sent a proposal in for an RFP back in, I think it was 2006. And we ultimately ended up with a land lease with the town of Nantucket on that parcel. And we proceeded to seek permitting to develop a shooting range there. There were some challenges by opponents as well. And through the permitting and working with the opponents and going to court, the 10-year lease that they had given us had run out. We're on a 2-year extension right now to give time to try to get another lease established. The select board decided, because the last article that was voted on by the voters was back in 2004, they wanted to revet this in front of the voters again. And they also wanted to put some specific term to the lease. There was no term defined in the 2004 article. So this article is written to better clarify, list a term, which is 50 years, and also include language to enter 2/3 of this property into a conservation restriction, which is required by the National Heritage Endangered Species Program. We had also gotten that approval, and I forget the exact year, 2009 or 10, I think. We went back to the town meeting and received a positive vote on an article to enter the land into a conservation restriction then. So this article does those two things over again. And I'll keep it at that, and that way I'll kind of get back on time and allow plenty of time for questions.
Steve, thank you. Kathleen Matthews, please.
Hi, this is Kathleen. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, first of all, Peter and Lee, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you to the Nantucket Civic League for having a forum like this. Like many of you, I am a big fan of Zoom because it's allowed more of us that own homes on the island to actually be a part of the civic process. It's also good to see you, Stephen. We've been on several calls together with the select board. And we're still hoping to get together with you, the Citizens Association of the Wauwinet, Matacasham area, to be able to talk to you about maybe some collaboration. We have somebody else on the call, Richard Schwab, who is also available for Q&A afterwards. Dr. Richard Schwab is an expert on lead and other issues that we think are potential, dangers of having a gun range. So I've been coming to the island with my husband since 1980. We actually came to Nantucket on our honeymoon. I'm going to refresh my screen there because I keep on freezing. We bought a home about 20 years ago. We live in the Matacasham area. We love Nantucket very much. As Stephen mentioned, what we're talking about is 29 acres of prime public land. This is adjacent to pristine conservation land. There is a parcel that the land bank owns, and Emily Molden is on the call, I see. There's also land adjacent to this that's owned by the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, and I know Alan Reinhardt, who's on staff there, and also Lucinda Young from their board are also on the call. But as Stephen mentioned, it's also adjacent to valuable industrial parkland. And recently we've seen Yates Gas and also Miles Reese move in there. They've been able to move their operations away from town and the harbor and out to that industrial park. So we're talking about prime public land. And as he said, we're talking about a 50-year lease that would actually go to the Nantucket Hunting Association. It's a private membership group, but they also, as a private group, hope to get off-island customers that would come in and shoot skeet and do target practice to help them pay for their capital costs and also their expenses. Now, as homeowners in the area, our initial concerns were the sound of gunshot. We already hear that because people shoot guns illegally in that area now. So we hear those guns. And, this is very alarming if you're a child with island wings riding your bike down Russell's Way or on Matacasham Valley Road. It's disturbing if you're going to the beach. And also difficult for the homeowners there and people to whom they want to rent their houses in the summertime. But after protests initially on the basis of noise, we did further research and really became very concerned about the byproduct of shooting, and that is lead. Now, the Hunting Association says that they will patrol and try to make sure that no lead skeet is used, and that they will comb the berms of this outdoor range to try to cull through that and get any lead bullets. But as you know, this is going to be a difficult process with a large shooting range with up to like 16 lanes to make sure we get all that lead out of there. We're concerned about the aquifer. We've already seen some horrible things happen with the airport and Matacasham Valley, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen to this property. So after speaking at a couple of those select board meetings, we also heard the Hunting Association and the police who say they want a legal place to practice. And we understand that. And we've offered a compromise of a indoor range that the homeowners in that area are willing to help fund. The Hunting Association does not have deep pockets, and so we're willing to collaborate with them. We've been trying to get Stephen to meet with us to see if we could put forth a indoor range, which would have a much smaller footprint. It would allow much more of that land to remain pristine and open as it is, adjacent to the land bank and conservation land. And so we believe it's unwise to move forward with a 50-year lease until we can come to a compromise and some collaboration with the Hunting Association on an indoor range. And I think to be able to do that between now and the town meeting is going to be very difficult. So we would recommend voting this down and then giving us all more time to come up with an indoor range. I believe the select board has said that they would give special consideration and advantage to any proposal that is an indoor range. And that's what we're hoping we can work with Stephen Holgate and also the Nantucket Hunting Association to put forth. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have to declare my own personal interest in this. As the administrator for the School of Mines and Metallurgy at Missouri University of Science and Technology, I had faculty members who were working with Department of Defense Army to help clean up the ranges at Fort Leonard Wood, which is the Army's principal infantry base. And so, yes, I am aware that there are byproducts and that there are also technologies for cleanup. But I'm not under retainer on either side, so I'm going to defer. Do we have anybody asking a question? I see Abigail Camp, Rick Atherton, and Patricia Bailman. Of those three, let's see if we can go in order. Is anything being asked about hot tubs and spas? Just speak up if you are.
This is Abigail Camp. I had my hand up way back when Rick Atherton asked about if the height of building of the new boathouse had taken into consideration the rise in water, and the HDC does do that, and the building that came before us will be raised, and the houses on Washington Street as well. And sorry, that was way back when you were talking about 1 through 10. I think.
You don't have to say sorry. The moderator may have jumped to the next portion without seeing that your hand was up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Rick. Rick Atherton. You're still on mute, Rick. Okay, these pregnant silences are difficult for the moderator to deal with, so we're going to move to Patricia Bailman. And is it Bailman or Bauman or yet
Thank
another
you.
alternative? Please correct me.
Thank you. It's Beilman. Thank you. I just wanted to say that the presentations on the hot tubs were informative and instructive. I do, however, have some questions of Jesse Dutro, who cites that the articles are biased, unproductive, and misleading, and they miss the picture and they could be improved. And I'd like him to be more specific in his observations, because I'm not quite sure what he means. Thank you.
Jesse, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, happy to. Sorry, there's a lot there. Well, I mean, biased, it's simply that subconsciously or consciously, when you're writing a survey or doing a survey, you are trying to, your outcome, if you are against the hot tubs and spas, it's going to, I just don't think it's fair. I think that if you did it, if it was someone that was unbiased and did the survey or did the article, that you would have the public, and this is what I mean by counterproductive. The public, I think, is a little bit shaky right now with how many articles with swimming pools have come, and it has some articles have stopped construction completely, not deliberately. Some articles have caused a huge boom in the building of pools because they're afraid they're not going to get something in. And it's counterproductive. I find that environmental issues are extremely important when it comes to these, and where the water goes and how it's treated. I think safety is a huge concern, and I think more important than any of these things due to new state laws with auto covers. And none of these are being brought up about spas and pools in general. And so I think that, would answer my biased and unproductive comments. And if you have any other questions, please, I'm happy to answer them. But were there any other comments I made that you were questioning?
And also you mentioned, Mr. Ducho, that people need to have outdoor space and children need to have outdoor space. Well, Nantucket is an island, and last time I checked, there were many, many beaches around the island, and there's just plenty of places for people to go to have entertainment outside. And if people want to swim in a pool, they have a beautiful community swimming pool.
Thank you.
Again,
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. But they also have their backyard. And I feel as a parent and 3 children and trying to raise them on this island, if I can tell my child to go in their backyard versus packing up the car and taking them to the beach or to a playground, because a playground or a hot tub is too noisy for my neighbors, I just feel like that's just, that's just one-sided. And and you're not thinking about the parents who are trying to raise a family that are part of this community and deserve to be able to use their backyard as they want to, and not have to be worried about making too much noise for their neighbors because they have children. That's just silly, if you ask me.
Thank you. I turn now to Rick Atherton, and Rick, if you can come on, I'll hear you. If not, I'm going to ask Ryan to double check your mute.
I just got the sign to unmute again. Lee, can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you, Rick.
Great. I just wanted to go back to the fertilizer issue for a minute. And if I understand the recommendation of the Finance Committee, it's to adopt a home rule petition to go to Boston to get, in effect, authorization for local regulation. And I may not have that quite right, but my question sort of to the Finance Committee or to the other town powers that be, I sense that's a long process. We'll run once again into the fertilizer lobby. And it implies that we're willing to accept the risk that will go nowhere. And in the meantime, nothing changes. I respect Marty and the way he handles his business. But the reality is, over the past 10 or 15 years since the Article 68 work group, and since we spent, what, $40 million on sewers to Monomoy and Shimo, the harbor doesn't seem to be progressing out of a very dangerous position. And I'd like to feel that they understand that, accept the risks, and we're more positive about recommending a solution that I think is going to work, or finding a way to seek some solutions. They may be difficult, but I'm not at all convinced going to the state for local authorization will come in time to make a real difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And I also see that Richard Schwab is asking a question. And Richard, you were referred to as Dr. Schwab. Tell us a little bit more, please.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Okay, yeah. So I am Dr. Schwab. I work at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I'm a pulmonologist. And I just wanted just comment on a little bit what Kathy had already said, and she did a nice job, but lead is a real concern. I mean, this is not something you can get rid of. If it gets into the water system, it's a huge problem. It's not just the water, there's lead dust that can affect children, and the ramifications of lead toxicity to children is enormous. And if that lead gets into the aquifer, into the water system, it's not getting out. I mean, Nantucket would be ruined pretty much forever. And this is not something that should be taken lightly. And at minimum, there needs to be environmental impact studies on whether or not this is safe. I think many of you probably know that a lot of rifle ranges, shooting parks become Superfund sites, and who cleans them up? This is a big deal. And I really worry about the health of Nantucket and what's going to happen if a rifle range gets proposed. The indoor range solves the problem. I mean, you don't have any of these issues, and it really is a good compromise. We get that shooting is important for the police and other people, and the indoor range solves everything. And it just seems to us, I do live in Wigwam, and we're willing to help fund this. I mean, it seems like we could come to a reasonable compromise, but I really worry about the lead and what this is going to do long impact. I was hearing about the harbor and what's happening with, fertilizers. The same thing's going to happen here, and it's going to be a nightmare. So that's all I wanted to say.
So once again, your moderator jumps in with his past experience. Missouri University of Science and Technology is just a little bit west of the world's largest deposits of lead. The number one use for lead, of course, was batteries, car batteries. We all own 10 to 15 pounds of lead. It's in the front of our car. There's the cathode ray tube, which happily is gone. Ammunition, projectiles was a small part of it. X-ray shielding was another part. It's an industry in transition. But to Dr. Schwab's comments, the output of the smelter at Herculaneum was putting substantial amounts of lead product in the soil. Children playing in the soil could absorb lead. That smelter is closed, and as he pointed out, it is a Superfund site. However, I was exposed, not knowledgeable, but was exposed to the issues of the forms of lead, lead metal, lead oxide, lead carbonate, which was absorbed by the body and which was less so. It is an interesting discussion. But Steve, my question to you is, are there substitutes for lead in the projectiles?
Yes, thank you. And I was going to try to elaborate later on to your point. Lead exists in many different industries and has for many, many years. I'm not sure why, either through being naive or political reasons and monetary reasons, took a long time for industries to realize lead had issues. We got rid of lead paint, for instance, and shooting ranges were the same way. Yes, there are shooting ranges that are being cleaned up out there. They probably go way back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, where they did not practice, they had no best management practices, and the lead was not captured and the lead was allowed to leach. And that's the good thing about this range. We're building it from scratch right now with the current knowledge and best management practices. And we have designs out there that stop the lead from permeating down into the soil. You have liners that go in. Any runoff goes into a trench with limestone gravel to neutralize, raise the pH level so that it doesn't corrode. There are ways to mitigate, and there are many, many companies out there that reclaim the lead. You hire them, they come in, they dig out the sand, sift through it, reclaim the lead as a recycled metal, put the sand back, and add fresh sand with it. And I'm sorry, your question was, can you repeat again?
Were there alternatives to lead in the projectile?
Oh, yes, thank you. On the rifle and pistol range, no, most ammunition companies still use mostly lead, and that's why we have this backstop mitigating area that mitigates for the lead and removal of the lead. But on the trap range, which is basically clay discs being thrown into the air, shotguns shooting at them with shot, which is like a handful of BBs that come out of the shotgun. Those BBs, that shot is going to be non-toxic, it's going to be enforced. When you purchase a fee to use the trap range, we hand you a box of ammunition that is non-toxic, and they make non-toxic shotguns now, mainly because of the federal wildlife agency outlawed lead for waterfowl hunting. Another example of the human race learning as we go along. They realized that some dabbling ducks were dipping down and picking up, eating the vegetation and getting spent shotgun rounds, and it was getting lead poisoning to the waterfowl. So they banned lead shot in waterfowl hunting, and therefore the manufacturers make shot out of steel, bismuth, tungsten. So there are alternatives, and we're going to enforce that on the trap range. And the discs, the clay discs, are even biodegradable, non-toxic as well. So that's the area that's least impacted. There is no danger of lead. And then I also want to stress that if we don't build a shooting range, or we say we vote no to this article, it's just another big delay that you may see donors in the Hunting Association get discouraged and say, after 17 years, we're done. We'll just let the shooters go back to what they're doing now, which is shooting anywhere they want. They go out into the moors, side roads, wherever they, find a place to shoot. And you've got lead going unregulated in the ground. And you could be close to waterways or wetlands where the lead makes a bigger impact, can permeate quicker. So this range actually prevents or helps mitigate lead poisoning elsewhere in other areas, lead contamination, excuse me.
Stephen, thank you. Kathleen Matthews, you get the final word.
Well, Stephen, I know that in our conversations with the select board, that I think after they looked at the evidence, and potentially since they own the land, they would ultimately be held responsible if there was any environmental damage. They said that they would give most favorable consideration, a biased consideration, to an indoor range. And I'm just wanting to hear from you, since we've not been able to set up meetings with you to have that conversation, whether the Hunting Association is open to that indoor range, which would definitely contain any byproduct from the shooting.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank.
That's my question to Stephen.
Okay. And I appreciate these presentations. Town meeting is going to be interesting. As an old parliamentarian, I've discovered that everybody has to speak twice and at length, because that's the assurance that they'll be heard. Town meeting will not be short this year. But be that as it may, these are important issues, and we in the Civic League, we're glad of the opportunity. Now, the biggest issue of all is short-term rental and how it's treated by regulation, which is what town meeting will be dealing with in Articles 39, 42, and 43. We were going to organize a discussion panel based on the premise that these articles, particularly 39 and 42, were foundational and not the be all and end all, and that there was much more to be done with short-term rental. And the panel was going to be charged with discussing the future. It became clear that we might have had conflicts of interest with some of the presenters. We were concerned in the open meeting law about ethical considerations for town officials, and concluded that the best way to proceed was with the presentations that we've organized and a question and answer period, and then move forward, perhaps early in the summer, when we'll have a lot of people who are interested in this back on island as summer residents or part-time residents, and for the Civic League to organize a forum on short-term rentals when we would open up the question of quo vadis, where do we go next? But let's begin with presentations on Articles 39, 42, and 43. And since they're in principle diametrically opposed, you'll notice that there's a presenter, but no respondent, because Article 43 is in fact the respondent. And my colleague and friend Tobias Glidden tells us with apologies that he's bedridden, and Julia Lidner of Act Now will be speaking in his stead. So Dave Iverson, you get 39 and 42.
Thank you very much, Lee and Peter.
Could I interrupt? Leslie Forbes, I see your hand up. Is that for the current discussion or is it for a past question? You're on mute.
Thank you for this. Anyway, my question was for Jesse on the pools and spas. Listening to him, I'm confused about his position, and I would like Jesse to clear up his position on both Article 54, which is the one that would ban the hot tubs and spas in the ROH, SOH, and also 55, which is not a ban, but rather a reduction in size and a return to the gallonage limit that used to be part of the program. So Jesse, where do you stand, yay or nay, on 54 and 55? Or what would your advice? Yeah, where do you stand on those?
Since we're running past time, Jesse, if you could give a very quick answer, and then the two of you go into an email exchange if you want to be long.
Sure, no problem. I'll do my best. Thank you. So 54, I'm not for. I think there's too many opportunities where people would not be affecting anybody, any neighbors or any historic issues. There are lodge lots in the historic district. And then 55, I was the opponent, but if it was by itself without 54, I would probably vote for it because I don't really, I do care about Old Historic District. I am an HDC alternative member. And I see the issue where people are taking advantage of hot tubs and making them into pools, small pools in town, which that's not what the original article was written for. But by doing this, I feel like it's been misleading, and I was misled, and the public is being misled, and it's more of a scaring them that, oh wait, you can't have a pool spa, and then saying, well, actually you can, but we're going to give you this and then instead. And so I don't know. I think it's bad politics, and it should be one or the other, not both.
Okay, Jesse, thank you. And again, Leslie, if you want to contact Jesse or contact us at the Civic League, we'll pass your question back on to him. And now, with apologies to Dave Iverson, who's vice chair of the planning board. Dave, this time it really is on you.
Okay. Thank you, Lee and Peter again. I think that it was an accurate description when you said that that these are works in progress. I think mostly with 39, I think that there's a lot of room for regulation, which is I think what everyone's looking for in that article. So I think that when we meet again in early summer, I think it'll be a great discussion. I'd like to start with 42. It seems to be the most polarizing of the two articles. And I think most people are familiar with it. I think that probably the most polarizing piece of it is the thought that we are codifying this in all zoning districts. So that's one part of the article in 42. The other part though is there's some language in there about about regulating short-term rentals in apartment buildings and in workforce housing. And I think it's important. Those are two important pieces to this 42 that I think we need to figure out, if 42 doesn't pass, how we amend that moving forward so that we keep those two pieces of it, if the community doesn't desire to pass 42 as it is. So basically 42 restricts STRs in apartment buildings and workforce housing, and then added language to codify it in all zoning districts. And then these are companion articles. So 39 is where the regulation takes place. And I think we felt at the planning board, and a lot of people felt that that is really what the big cry is for in our community, is for regulation. And 39 provides that. I've heard a lot of feedback that people are under the impression that 39 can only regulate nuisances. And I think that that's not an accurate depiction. Town council was asked on numerous occasions in public meetings, and he said that 39 offers broad restrictions on many forms. So basically in 39, it enables you to regulate who, what, where, and when it comes to STRs, and for how long. So it's up to us as a community. If we pass 39, it will be up to the health department, the planning board, and to any citizen that wants to bring an article forward to regulate short-term rentals. I think that's it. I'll leave it at that.
Wow, you've just put us back on schedule, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there will be questions for you. And we have had several people raise their hand, and I'll get to them after we have the presentation on Article 43. And Julia Lidner, are you on the call?
I am, Lee.
Hi there.
Hi.
It's yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. I probably will be a little longer than Dave, but hopefully people don't mind too much. I know there's been a lot of discussion, but there's a lot of confusion around, zoning changes in general, I think are complicated is the bottom line. But I'll give a little bit of background because I think we have to repeat these things because not everyone is at all of these public meetings. But the reason why we're even talking about a zoning change related to short-term rentals is that there has been a Supreme Court case that's come down and ruled in a different municipality in Massachusetts that short-term rentals are not necessarily compatible with residential areas. And where a town has a tradition of short-term rentals, which is like Nantucket, by tradition of short-term rentals by residents and by homeowners, they were very clear that they might likely rule differently, that they would probably rule, it's the last footnote in the decision, which actually is fairly easy to read even for non-lawyers. They ruled that, they said that basically if they were looking at our zoning bylaws on Nantucket, they might very well rule that it would be an allowable use as an accessory use. And so the bottom line though is that short-term rentals is not a use that's clearly stated in Nantucket zoning bylaws. And frankly, we're not the only municipality. A lot of municipalities in Massachusetts are facing the same sort of dilemma in terms of what they're going to do with short-term rentals. And so, yes, we are at some point going to have to make it clear in our zoning that how we want to define the use and what we want to allow. So this is sort of the background of why we even have zoning proposals coming to town meeting. And I think that, Article 43 is trying to achieve a few different things. There was a lot of feedback that was provided after town meeting last year. And there are some things that became very clear in discussions with community members. The number one message was any short-term rental solution that comes forward has to ensure that year-round residents can continue to short-term rent on their own property, their own home, the back cottage, the garage apartment, or another dwelling on their property. We absolutely need and must protect year-rounders. And that was a very clear objective of the Citizens Article 43. The other thing that became quite clear, and I think that has been talked about a little bit more recently, is that this phenomenon that's more recent, the tradition on Nantucket has been homeowners, residents renting their homes, and it's been a long, long time tradition, whether they, as everyone's saying, whether they were called short-term rentals or they were called vacation rentals, people were renting their homes, using their homes and renting their homes to supplement their income, and that's what we're trying to protect. But this recent phenomenon that I think most of the viewers would have read about in articles, I think the most recent article I read was Joshua Tree, but there were many, many articles recently about large investor pools of money. You can call them corporate, you can call them investors, but they're big, big pools of money that are dedicating themselves to buying short-term rentals in residential areas in destinations like Nantucket. And it's not a surprise that Nantucket would be a target, albeit not the biggest target right now in terms of you hear about a lot of great destinations out there, the Savannahs, the Austins, the Nashvilles. These are all towns where we see a lot of these big pools of money going in, buying homes to convert them into purely commercial short-term rentals. That is what residents were saying should not be allowed. And that is the biggest difference between Article 43, the Citizens Article, and Article 42, the Planning Board Article. The Planning Board Article, in a sense, I think residents could think, yes, it will protect me. And at face value, they're not wrong because it does clearly allow short-term rentals, but it allows all short-term rentals, regardless of who's doing it, regardless of how much they're doing it. And that means that it would pave the way for these corporate-owned, purely commercial, whatever you want to call them, purely commercial short-term rentals operating in residential areas on the island. There are a lot of reasons why we don't want that, why I think a lot of residents don't want that. It certainly is detrimental to the fabric of the neighborhoods, to the community long-term. But the question is, how do you do it? And 43 is an example of a way to do that. So that is, to allow short-term rentals as an accessory use, and residents, year-round residents would be allowed to continue to do whatever they're doing, basically be exempt from, in terms of zoning. They would be able to short-term rent their own property by right, whether it's, like I said, the back cottage, the garage apartment, the basement apartment, the master suite. I mean, there are so many different ways that people take advantage of this to supplement the income on an island where we know it's such a compromise and a difficult place to live in terms of the cost of living. And so what Article 43 would also allow, and what we, I think is very important, is to give a clear path for seasonal homeowners, seasonal residents to be able to short-term rent. And this, both of those guarantees a continued strong local tourism economy. We absolutely need a good, healthy supply of vacation rentals to maintain a strong economy. And that's not what the argument is here. The question really is, do we want it to be residents doing it? Or over time, do we want to increase the number of these purely commercial STRs in our neighborhoods? So I think that, Styler, the Supreme Court decision, in a way, forces us to look at the issue. And the question is, what path are we going to take? Article 43, like I said, there are other communities in Massachusetts that have chosen to go down this path in terms of prioritizing residents, whether they use an owner-occupied definition, whether they use a resident definition. The towns of Lexington, Salem, Cambridge, Watertown, Boston outlawed, investor-owned outright because they have hotels. It makes sense for them. We don't have that luxury of having so many hotels. So we want to ensure a good supply. Whether it's Article 43 or, a version of Article 43, the ultimate solution can't hurt housing further, which is something that came out of the select board discussions, the little discussion that we were able to have at the select board level anyways. And that's not something that we believe Article 42 is accomplishing. And it's got to keep these more purely commercial short-term rentals out of the neighborhoods. And that's the focus of Article 43. And that's not what we believe Article 42 is doing. So, Article 39 is something, I think Dave said it, something that people want. The registry is something that people want. And frankly, they should vote, the voters should pass it. And I think it will pass. But Article 39, without a strong zoning bylaw, will not be able to have the options of managing STRs in the future. And it takes away a lot of the control. Once you give the right away to purely commercial short-term rentals to operate in these neighborhoods, you can't really take it back. So that's zoning. And so, I believe there are things that can be done through Article 39, but there are more at the margin, let's say, to maintain orderly, order and to make sure that, there's health and safety checks and all these kinds of things. So that was, sort of what I wanted to say, and I'm sure there's going to be questions. So I will.
Thank you, Julia. On my screen, I see 4 questions, and I'm going to play a little bit of moderator's prerogative. Kathy Baird's got her hand up. Kathy was invited to be part of the panel to discuss short-term rentals. When we canceled the panel, Kathy Baird was no longer on the program. But having raised your hand, Kathy, you're with Nantucket now, if I recall correctly. Let's hear what you have to say.
Okay, I have my mute off. Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. I'm with Nantucket Together. Actually, that's the name of our group.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I actually have a question for Dave Iverson. And basically, my understanding is that the Article 39 is intended to be the framework for the STR regulations, and that the town is planning to use the registration process to collect the demographic data they don't have now to figure out, are there a lot of commercially owned short-term rentals? What do they look like? How are they used? And then be able to determine where the problems are, if there are problems, and regulate those. So my understanding is that you chose to use this kind of vehicle, which is a general bylaw, as opposed to a zoning bylaw, because you could be more flexible with it, and you could learn more. You could, as trends show up, you could have the Board of Health come up with suggestions for changes in regulation, and that the select board could approve them, and it wouldn't have to go through the zoning process or the town meeting process, and that's just a framework. So what I would like to do is just ask like 3 different questions. I want to pose some ideas, like let's say these kinds of things came up to be problems or things that you wanted to regulate. Would these kinds of things be things that you could control through Article 39? And one would be, could the town, for example, say, okay, we're not sure what's going on with short-term rentals. Could we put a moratorium on the registration of new short-term rentals? In other words, you can't operate a new one yet if you're not already registered with the state, for example. That's one example. Could you, as the part of the approval process, deny an applicant for short-term rental because they've got a history of documented nuisance reports, like Board of Health capacity issues or noise issues, for example? And then the third example would be, could you put a limitation on the number of short-term rentals that could be operated by a single entity? Is that something that you could do in Article 39. So those are just three examples that are not in there now, but they could be, should the town decide that would, that's my question. Could they be in there?
Thank you, Kathy. So let me explain that we've still got four people raising their hand, one of whom is Dave Iverson. So Dave's in the queue, and he will have his comments and a response to your questions. But before I do that, Dave, Ann Dew has raised her hand. Ann, are you asking about this issue, or are you trying to respond back to the earlier issue?
I have lots of things to say about STRs, but my hand was up in order to say that the survey, I had nothing to do with the survey. Jesse suggested that it was biased because it was my survey. And I think it's very important to make it clear that it's absolutely not my survey. It was Nantucket Town Association's survey. And I think Henry did a great job of explaining exactly what the survey did and its results. And it's quite clear to us that and all the people that I know that have looked at this, the survey was not biased. And it's very disheartening to see our town officials suggesting that it is. So I think it was very important to make that clear. But I'll cede the floor because others probably have more burning questions about short-term rentals than I do. Thank you.
And thank you. I'm glad that worked out that way. I turned now to Dave Iverson, who had his own response to offer, and also responses to Kathy's question. Kathy, yours was a multiple question, so I'm going to help Dave. He may ask you to repeat parts 2 and 3, just to make sure that we're clear on what it is you're asking. Your turn, Dave.
Okay, thank you. And I did breeze through these two articles pretty quickly, but I figured that we would really kind of get to the meat of it through questions. So I appreciate your questions, Kathy. I think it's disingenuous to refer to this article as a registry, because that is not what this is. This is the framework for real regulation that bypasses the cumbersome and inefficient zoning regulations. And what I mean by that, there's a concept in zoning called uniformity provisions. And so what that says is that you need to uniformly, all of these regulations need to apply uniformly across the board. And that creates a situation where it's really hard to pick out regulations for different districts, different operators and different people. So what the state did in passing the law to enable us to do this is they provided a way for us to regulate in town bylaws instead of zoning bylaws. So through the town bylaws, like I said earlier, we are able to regulate where these things happen. So to give you, for instance, if we feel that in our 10 zoning district that we are overwhelmed with short-term rentals, we can cap them. We can say, okay, no more than 10% of the housing units in R10 can be a short-term rental. We would never be able to do that in the zoning bylaw. So that's just, it's more of an agile kind of surgical approach to regulating, where zoning is a much broader approach, if that makes sense to you. So when it comes to our ability to shut down problematic ones, very much so. If we can refuse to re-permit a property if it's continually a problem. And I think that that's important. I mean, we don't want, that's what people are asking for. When it comes to this investor-owned piece, it's funny, UMass did a study. They got information, I think, on 1,700 of the permitted STRs we have right now. And what they came up with as far as this investor-owned piece, they found that there was 58 owners that had multiple properties. The total properties were 157. So at this point, there's not really data to suggest that this is really taking over the short-term rental business in Nantucket. Within 39, we have the ability to restrict. If you own more than 5, you can only rent 2. We can do that through 39. The process of enforcement through zoning is difficult at best. And I think all you have to do is probably drive through some neighborhoods around this island to see that there are these ongoing zoning infractions that never get resolved. And the reason that is because the process is you get served with a violation. You start to get fined. Within 30 days, you go to the clerk magistrate. 9 times out of the 10, the clerk magistrate slaps your hand, says, we'll waive the fines, don't do it anymore. With 39, you can get called into court. You can be fined a great deal more money. And the consequences are immediate. So I think that it's a much stronger way to enforce short-term rentals. Did I cover all that, Kathy?
Oh, you did. Thank you very much. And that's really what I was getting at. It seemed like there seemed to be a lot of discussion that that the 39 won't do anything if there's a need to. And I just wanted to help have you clarify that for me, because I thought it was.
No, I agree. I mean, that was my biggest fear going forward. And I asked Mr. Giorgio in public meetings more than once, what is our ability to restrict? And he said, we have a very broad ability to restrict any issues with short-term rentals through 39. So that's why 42 is not the scary monster that everyone makes it out to be, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dave. I've got 2 more hands raised. Peter Marson, our co-president of the Civic League. So Peter, I'm presuming this is a question and not your valedictory statement as we close down. Peter.
Lee, I'm simply going to introduce a technical clarification as what I regard a purely demographic question. You're going to hear reference to year-rounder, and I want you to understand how year-rounder can be operationally defined within Massachusetts, because we have a wonderful town clerk system. To be a year-rounder means that Nantucket is your legal place of residence. So the game between, do I live in Massachusetts where I'm taxed one way, or do I live in Florida where I'm taxed another way? There's no ambiguity about it in terms of what the town clerk has to say. The town clerk says, you are a legal resident of Nantucket if you show me things like a driver's license that says Nantucket is your legal place of residence. And if you show me a tax return that says I file my federal taxes from this legal residence where I live. And she'll ask you some more things until she's willing to certify that you are that Nantucket is your legal place of residence. That is how we can define a year-rounder. I have been a year-rounder here legally on her list for more than 1 year. I didn't do it yesterday. And I am, in the sense of a year-rounder, committed to certain principles about how Nantucket should be. If I bought a second home and said, I'd like to be a year-rounder there too, the town clerk would say, well, which is the one where your car is registered and from which you file your federal tax return? I just want everybody to know that there is a way to get an operational definition that defines who a year-rounder is, and also can open up the contemplation of someone who has been a year-rounder for at least X years, which would be a retrospectively defined year-rounder, not someone who landed here yesterday, bought a property and said, I want to say I live here now, because they would have to live here for 2 years before they could really start acting like an avaricious investor and reveal that they really bought the property just to be renting it out as an Airbnb. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Peter. Julia, I think you've got a response that you'd like to offer.
I guess I'd like a response, but I also have a question for Dave, if that's okay, because I agree with the large majority of what Dave says in terms of Article 39. We call it the registry, but yes, it does a lot more than what a simple registry might do in other circumstances, or it could do a lot anyways. The real concern is that it's not what we're asked to vote on. What we're being asked to vote on is not a set of clear regulations that we understand and we agree with. We're being asked to legalize all short-term rentals everywhere on the island, regardless of, whether it's a residential neighborhood, regardless of whether it's going to be operated as a purely commercial short-term rental. That's the real concern. And my understanding, I've had a lot of conversations because a lot of this is legalese. And frankly, I'm not a land use lawyer, but I've had a lot of conversations with our land use lawyer and with other people who I think are closer to the law than maybe I would be. And they share the concerns that I guess that at the end of the day, if the zoning is not fostering the goals that we have as a community for short-term rentals, then we won't have the ability to actually manage the short-term rentals the way that we really want to down the road. So my question to Dave is this one, because I know this has been posed to town council a couple different ways, but the way I look at it is any way we regulate short-term rentals in the future has to ensure that year-round residents can continue to do it, no questions asked. That seems to be like on their own home, right? So let's assume that for a second. That seems to be loud and clear. We heard that last year too. So what we might want to do though is, let's say, restrict purely commercial short-term rentals. But my understanding from talking to lawyers is that if we have one definition for short-term rental in our zoning, which is all of the uses are treated the same, it's one type of use, then we won't have the ability to, let's say, give year-rounders, be exempt from any limitations, and then let's say give the commercial entities a limit of 100 days or whatever, limit you want to do on them. We're not going to be able to cap this group and then tell the year-rounders, don't worry, we're going to keep protecting you, because that's I think is a real goal of an STRC. So I'm wondering, Dave, have you posed that question to town council, or is it clear to you? Because what I'm getting from the lawyers is not possible with Article 42.
So that goes back to the uniformity provision, right? And that's why it's important to have 39 where the uniformity provision doesn't exist. The uniformity provision only exists in zoning bylaws. It does not exist in the town bylaws we're using to regulate. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but I guess, that's where we kind of differ, right? That's where we're sort of not, either we're both getting bad advice, but we're getting different advice. And, I've spoken to a lot of folks I know people are worried about maintaining their short-term rentals. That's perfectly reasonable, frankly, it is. But there are a lot of people who are worried about what's popping up next door, and because it's not someone who lives there ever. And for those people, and there are year-round residents in that group, and I know it's not a huge part of what's happening, right? You're right. Like, we can argue about the numbers, but it's not the majority of short-term rentals that are commercially operated. But when you look at the pools of money coming in, for me, it's this poster child Heirloom that is buying in year-round, year-round areas. And they're big, large group, purely commercial, and they only have they're trying to buy their third property in a year. They're not that, they don't have that many, but they own 300 in a couple cities, together. So what if they buy 20? What if they buy 30? What if somebody else shows up? So that's, at the end of the day, that's where we're, I think, a little bit on different.
And no, listen, Julia, I appreciate that. And I don't think any of us, that there's something about this investor, and I don't even want to use the word investor because I think it's so undefined, but these multiple unit owners, right? Or the fear of them, that we don't really have any data to prove that they're really doing anything that terrible, but the whole idea really leaves a terrible taste in everyone's mouth. I think that's undeniable. But we, through 39, can say that any individual or entity can only have this many short-term rentals, right? So we could cap it at 2, we could cap it at 3, we could cap it at 1. I think 1's probably not the greatest idea, but so 39 gives us this ability. I understand the fear about codifying in 42. I understand that people are worried, but in all honesty, if we don't pass 42, why is that any different than codifying? Because right now we're treating it as an accepted use. It's everywhere.
So can I actually rebut, or is this okay?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sorry.
Saperstein. No, I'm asking Lee, sorry. I don't know if it's proper. So I was encouraged recently reading some of the building commissioner, or reading at Town Giorgio's comments about what he believed was the building commissioner's position, that this is an allowable use as an accessory use on Nantucket. That would sort of keep the commercial guys out, and then it would mean that 42 is giving up a lot more than where we currently stand.
I would disagree.
Wow, what a way to close off this question and answer period. I don't see. Yes, I do. Kathy, you've got your hand raised again.
Thank you. Just a question for Julia then, I think, on the Article 43. The way I read it, first of all, it says year-round on your principal residence, not your principal property, which to me is different, which also implies that if you have a second property on the island, I believe Tobias actually answered that question, that would be subject to the Zoning Board of Appeals accessory use. My question on it really is, if most of the short-term rentals are actually run by part-time residents and not year-round residents, how long would those of us who are not year-round residents, and maybe we've owned our homes for 30 years like I have to wait in line for a zoning board public hearing process when we see that they process about 2 per year right now? If there were 1,500 homeowners waiting in that line, and what do we do with our tourist trade? Where do they stay until you have that process approved?
That's a good question, Kathy. I mean, the reality is, if you can think about something a little bit similar with what's happening right now, right? We have an issue with our zoning, right? But short-term rentals can go on, right? We're not in a bad spot. When I think about the ZBA process, we've seen it in other towns, right? In Massachusetts, Salem is an example. ZBA can see a lot more than 2 cases. The ZBA only sees 2 cases because sometimes it doesn't even have an agenda. Like, there are no items on the agenda because it's actually a lot of their authority has been taken away, if you like. I apologize, I have to move. There's somebody coming in the room. Hold on.
So they could process, in your mind, 40, 50 a
if
month?
you think about, I apologize, give me just a second. I'm moving to small children. Let's move in a different room. So if you know, at the planning board, for example, they, of course, Dave is going to have a lot more info about this than I do, but I'm going to try. They see secondary dwelling applications, and there's a standard for them. And typically, for example, 3/4 or 80% or 90% of them are, they meet all the tests, they meet all the requirements, and they are sort of almost pre-approved by staff, whereas meeting the standards. And one of them or 2 of them might get pulled from the list because some of the planning board members have questions, or there are discussions to be had around them. So there are ways to sort of expedite things. And I think that it seems to me, but this is ZBA obviously, the large majority would sort of fall in that category. And in
But you
these
have to have
types
a
of,
public hearing and you have to have a butters. It's a very, very formal process. You can't speed that up.
so it's the same thing with the secondary dwelling process. And it doesn't get bogged down because we talk about those that, may have certain issues, but the large majority of them would likely not have issues. What I'll say, Kathy, is that regardless of your feelings on Article 43, if you don't like it, you don't have to vote for it. But
I
Article
can't vote.
40, well, that's a different discussion.
Okay, I mean, that's an obvious statement, but what I'm suggesting is that we keep the level of discussion as high as we can.
Oh, yeah.
Dave, if I may, Joe, and Joe, I'm going to say Delano, but it could be Delano, and you're going to correct me. But you also corrected me on something else. I was looking at only one list, and that was the list of panelists. We have 5 questions from the attendees. We're perfectly prepared to go modestly over our projected end time. So let me start with Joe, because you probably had your hand up for quite a while, and I apologize, I didn't see it. You're muted. No, you're not.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lee. John Delano it is. You had the last name correct on the first one. And,
okay, I see that now, John. I apologize.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm not sure why I am not showing video, but I'm clicking buttons to see why, and I can't seem to find out where it is. But in any case, let me first begin by thanking you and Peter for hosting this on behalf of the Civic Association. I am someone who is urging a no vote on Article 43, and I do have a question for Julia as respect to that. I am a 42-year property owner, homeowner on Nantucket, but a non-voting taxpayer. I haven't quite yet done what Peter has done, although that is likely in the future, because I love Nantucket. And I have always rented my home on Nantucket during part of the summer because it's the way I finance and pay for my home. Article 43 seeks to distinguish between folks like us, the non-voting taxpayer, and the voting taxpayer. Julia noted in her comments that we must protect year-rounder homeowners. Frankly, I think we should protect all of us on this island. I have never felt on this island until Act Now came around, the discrimination or the notion that somehow there were 2 classes of homeowners on this island. We all love this island. That's why we chose it. In my case, in 1979. And so the notion that somehow or other the rules should be different for me than they are for everybody else, that was part of Article 90 that I was so pleased to see was voted down 2-1 by the voting homeowners of Nantucket, the voting residents. And I would hope the same would be true with respect to Article 43. Bottom line is that I have no problems with Julia's comments about, and Dave for that matter, with regulating corporate off-island investors. But lumping me and the thousands of others on Nantucket in with that group is offensive and ought not to be, frankly, permitted. Kathy asked the question, one of the questions that I had, which had to do with the fact that I am deeply, deeply concerned that the zoning board does not have, as currently structured, the capability of approving the right of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Nantucket homeowners the right to rent their homes in 2023. As you know, many of those leases are signed by the end of the summer. And I don't know how that's going to happen on the island of Nantucket. Article 43 will destroy the tourist industry on the island. That was one concern. But the other concern I have has been this notion that we're going to start suing each other, neighbor against neighbor. And that's a question I wanted to ask Julia about, because I know Tobias had said in some previous planning board meetings that there'd be a fair handshake, I think were the words he used. with respect to approving of ZBA permits. But I guess the question I have is there anything in Article 43 that would preclude Act Now or their supporters from suing 10, 100, or everyone who decides to rent their summer homes? Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk. I really appreciate what the Civic League is doing, and I'm happy to have been a member of the Civic League for 40 plus years.
John, thank you. You ring a bell. I was awash ashore in April of 1979.
Well, you beat me because I bought my home in September of 79. So you're the elder, not I, Lee.
Okay, thank you. Julia and Dave, we have 4 more questions. I think they've had their hands raised for quite a while. And so I'm going to call on them, and I'm not going to shut this down until Dave Iverson and Julia Linder have an opportunity for a final word. Leslie Forbes.
Hi there. I think I'm unmuted. Yes?
Yep. No video, but I can hear you.
They don't allow us to have video. So anyway, zoning. I would like to have assurance that town bylaws would supersede a zoning change, that once I have the right to do something on my property, whether it's putting in a swimming pool or a building to within 5 feet of my lot line or whatever it is, it's a big deal to try and take that away from me. And I don't know how a town regulation can then come in and say, well, you used to be able to have, you used to be able to do a short-term rental, but now you can't because we have decided that it's too noisy. You have weird renters. It just doesn't make sense to me because either that or it would turn people like me, if I had a pre-existing unit, that I'd then become a pre-existing, a lot of us would be pre-existing.
Leslie, I'm no attorney, and you need to take this question up with an attorney, but it's my understanding the Constitution of the United States forbids the reversal of something that was previously legal into something illegal. But there are lots of little wrinkles to that. If there's a change in use, that may not be deemed a previous use. So as I say, it's worth taking up with an attorney, but I don't think the town or any other entity can simply walk over an existing arrangement and say it is now no longer legal.
Can I just add in real quickly?
Yeah, Dave.
If you don't mind, just real quick. I think that you can't be lumping your setbacks in and your by right pools or second dwellings in with this. The state gave towns the ability to restrict short-term rentals as far as land use only by a town bylaw. Okay, so no other land use can be regulated by a town bylaw. It needs to be regulated through zoning. And that's where that pre-existing non-conforming grandfathering would come in. Grandfathering doesn't necessarily exist in 39. And we've asked town council that many times. But if Styler's been mentioned here a million times, in the Styler decision, the Styler was not allowed, that he asked for a grandfathered use. The court denied a grandfathered use and said it was an illegal use from the beginning and can't be grandfathered. And so therefore, no grandfathering. So I think that when it comes to 39, grandfathering can, I mean, if you're talking about your right to rent here as a short-term rental now, there's questions on whether that exists, right? I mean, Julia will say we don't have the legal right. Some people will say we do. So yeah, I think your fear is unfounded. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that you should talk to a lawyer, but there's no way that anyone will take your right to build something by right on your property away through a town bylaw. That's in the realm of zoning. Short-term rentals is a little different though.
So,
Thank you, Dave.
so here I am. So,
Leslie, is it quick or?
yeah, two things. So even if 42 were to pass, there would be no grandfathering if 39 decided to do something different.
Yes.
Even if, because 42 says you've got this by right. And as soon as I run into by right, I get problems. And I also don't really, as a citizen, I don't really want to have to hire an attorney to figure this out.
I appreciate
No,
that.
I'm a voter. That's what I am. And, why do I have to hire an attorney at however many hundreds of dollars an hour?
I would hope that when this ends, you will not need an attorney, that your rights will be fairly easy to figure out through the bylaw.
Thank you, Dave. Charity Benz has had her hand up for quite a while. Charity?
Yep, I'm here. Good afternoon. I want to comment on something John Delano said about two classes of citizens. There have been two classes of citizens on this island for hundreds of years, and there probably always will be. And it's just getting worse now. Not worse, but I mean, it's always been that way. So I think everybody has to get used to that. I had another question about commercial tax rates in non-owner occupied. If there should be a non-owner occupied use, commercial use of residential property. And I didn't know if that has been explored. That's my first question. And, taxis and other things like that have been regulated for years. So I think probably regulation is just something that happens. And probably in the long run, this is going to be litigated one way or the other. But I do have a question about the commercial tax rate if these properties are being run as commercial enterprises. That's it.
Thank you. Does anybody have an answer? Obviously, if it's not owner occupied, the residential discount does not apply. But whether or not there's a separate rate that might apply to commercial properties such as inns and hotels, I simply don't know. And I think our financial people are no longer on the call.
Can I offer a perspective? It's not my own. It's an advice that we had gotten on this question early on.
Yeah, go.
So we actually had two sets of lawyers, two different firms look at this question because it did seem pretty obvious that if you were zoning and assessment are different, assessor and zoning are different. So you could be, you could be zoned in a commercial district, but you're actually a resident. So you're being taxed at the residential rate. Okay. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. So let's set zoning aside for a second. We had lawyers look at whether you could assess a property that was in a residential area, but that was used as a pure commercial short-term rental as commercial rates, commercial real estate rates. And the answer we got from both was yes. But that is really the discretion of the assessor. And so if, ultimately, we don't believe there's a case that's been seen by the DOR, the Department of Revenue. So the Department of Revenue could have a different opinion. But there's a couple reasons why the lawyers were saying they believed it would. And so, residential tax rates or commercial tax rates are 1.7 times the rate of residential tax rates on Nantucket. That's even without the residential exemption. So if you're, a year-round resident, you've got residential exemption and you're comparing yourself to the commercial tax rates, you're almost half of what the commercial guys are paying. So that, in a sense, you could say that residential, we're all sort of subsidizing this if in fact they could be taxed at a higher use rate, which is the commercial rate.
Thank you, Julia. We have several more questions. Brooke Moore has had her hand up for a considerable period of time. Thank you, Brooke.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time you're taking today on this. I have two questions that might go to Dave, and I saw John Giorgio's face pop up. Is there another community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that has passed a zoning bylaw similar to the one proposed in Article 42? And if so, has the regulatory framework been enacted and has that been tested legally to make a final sort of a judicial or a case law review of the supremacy of zoning versus the regulatory bylaw? And then my other question, and forgive me, John, I've asked this several times in various meetings and I don't feel like I've had a definitive answer. What is the mechanism by which we move from the Article 39 regulatory bylaw and registration as written, and presumably if we pass it at town meeting, to a more robust regulatory framework that might include limits in various zoning districts, limits of number of days, limits of ownership? What is the process within governance by which that framework gets built out? Is it Board of Health alone? Is it Board of Health and Select Board? Is it Board of Health Select Board? And does it require town meeting vote in certain areas as it gets more and more robust and restrictive? Let me say that.
Brooke, you may have mistaken another image for that of John Giorgio. I do not see John on our list of participants, panelists or attendees. If he is here, speak up, but I don't think we're going to hear from him.
Okay, sorry.
Good questions, but
and Brooke, I would love to be able to give you answers. I don't have them, but I could certainly look into it and get them for you.
I would appreciate those answers in writing before town meeting, just for the voters to understand better.
Looks like Edward Sanford might have an answer.
Yeah, I would like, I certainly can speak to the, we have asked our lawyer, she's a municipal lawyer, she's a land use lawyer, if she could dig into other municipalities in Massachusetts, because there are a lot of them, there are hundreds of them. And she found no evidence of any other municipality that had codified short-term rentals the way that Article 42 would. The only other community that I know tried is Barnstable, but they got a lot of pushback from their from certain neighborhoods, Centerville, Osterville in particular. So it didn't happen, and even that didn't go as far as 42 though.
Thank you, Julia. I see you, Dave. Joan Taylor has had her hand up for a considerable period of time. So if you don't mind, I'll turn to Joan, then Dave Laverson, and then Charity Benz wants to come back in, as do Peter Marson and Edward Sanford. So I've got you all, but if you don't mind, Joan Taylor first, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know why my video isn't coming through, but I'll just speak. I have been coming to Nantucket since I was 10 years old. My family originally rented there. I now own a house on Mill Street. While I am not a year-round resident, I spend a good amount of time there in the off-season. I've contributed heavily in donations via the rental that I've done in the summer, actually raised the money to contribute to land bank procurement of the lots on Mill Street and North Mill Street recently. And so I'm a year-round, I would say a quasi year-round resident who cares deeply about Nantucket. And, you know, I too feel that those of us who are not year-round residents, but may sometime choose to be, really contribute a lot to the community. And my problem with 43 is simply that it's too restrictive, and it really doesn't separate these commercial organizations from those of us who are not year-round residents, but spend a significant amount of time there, rent our house for shorter periods of time. But traditionally, there has been the ability to rent your house for, you know, certainly all of July and August if you choose to. And I have business considerations elsewhere where those aren't my favorite months, and I don't choose to be there, and I need to be elsewhere right now. So I just want to say that. And the other thing that's disturbing to me, although I can't vote, is there are so many questions, legal questions that are unanswered, that I really am concerned about any of these passing at this point in time. and that I don't think the way to do this is to pass articles without understanding the full ramifications. So I really support those being in writing for the voters clearly before these articles are voted on. But thanks very much for this forum. I find it very educational, and everybody caring so much that's working on this.
Thank you, Joan. Now, we are running a little past our predicted end time. And as somebody who's lectured to a classroom of sleeping students, the mind can't absorb what the bottom won't. And so we need to consider drawing to a close, but I've got Charity Benz, Edward Sanford, and Peter Morrison. Edward, you haven't had a chance, but Edward or Ed, you'll tell me. You haven't had a chance to speak. So you go next, and then Charity, and then Peter.
Well, I was just going to try to answer the previous question, which on how to regulate short-term rentals, and it really all starts with the and I can't find the state the Mass General Law that's really started this whole situation, which is the short-term rental tax law that was passed in late 2018. But in the body of that law, it's about 16 pages long, and on about page 13, they talk about the powers granted to cities and towns and counties to further regulate short-term rentals, and it's quite extensive if you read what the law says. And so I think that's where the foundation of regulation really sits. And when I read the law, it seemed to me that the Select Board and the Board of Health had tremendous latitude to pass regulations about short-term rentals, really outside of town meeting, as far as I could tell. Of course, I didn't call an attorney to, get an opinion on it. But in my reading of it, I wish I could find the law and quote, but I can't. So that's sort of that's where it lay. And just one other last comment. If neither of these articles pass, which is based on everything that you see in the paper, might be a reasonable conclusion, there's an issue outstanding in the courts, in that Catherine Ward has sued her neighbor Linda and Oliver Grape. The basis of the suit is that they're renting short term, and then it's an illegal commercial use in a residential zone. If the town does nothing to define short-term rentals, just leaves it alone, we can't get to a conclusion on a regulation, that lawsuit will ultimately go a long way in defining what short-term rentals are on Nantucket. It's quite possible it's going to take a while because it's in land court right now. It'll end up in appeals court. Whoever loses is going to appeal the decision. It'll end up in appeals court, and that could take another year or so. But however that decision comes down is really going to be a determining factor. So by non-action, the town is allowing the courts to decide the short-term rental issue. It's possible that the judge will rule, that the appeals court will eventually rule in favor of the plaintiffs, Catherine Ward, and short-term rentals will be illegal it's limited, I think, to the ROH zone, but I've had attorneys tell me that really would spill into all the residential areas. So there you have a situation where short-term rentals would be illegal until, again, the town could potentially get together and decide what to do about it. But it's as long as we don't do anything in the court, that lawsuit is hanging out there.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah.
Charity Benz. Charity, I see by the icon that you're muted.
Okay.
Now you're good.
Okay. I wanted to compliment Joan Taylor on and agree with her on doing everything that possibly can be done to explain this clearly to everybody who is going to vote on it. And of course, I think there are many, many people who have an interest in it who aren't voters. And there should be a good turnout at ATM this year. But because it is so confusing, And because there have been so many people who have said, well, can't we get a work group together consisting of, town officials, citizens, the real estate industry and all of that. I wonder why there hasn't been a suggestion that we consider doing that and then having a special town meeting in the fall. And as far as Mr. Sanford's comment, this is going to be litigated one way or the other. I mean, even if the town passes something. So that is one comment. The other comment I have is I would wonder if the town might be interested in doing an audit to see how many people are renting their properties are not here, according to what the state standards are for a legal resident in the state of Massachusetts of 183 days, and claiming the residential exemption. And if it gets down to Article 39 passing, I think that would be an interesting aspect of this to explore. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charity. Peter, you're the last person standing, except Edward wants to come back. So Peter, I'm going to call on you. You've had your hand up for quite a while.
Okay.
And no, wait a minute, Peter. I'm going to call on you twice. Once for your question, then I'm going to double check whether or not anybody else wants to raise a warrant article. We're long out of time, but we still need to know. And then I'm going to call on you for final words. So your question first.
Okay, it's not a question, it's a challenge to Julia Lindner. And the challenge is to think about how to operationalize and crisply define what we all have in mind, which is a person who is a Nantucketer by choice, so that it embraces the point of view of the two non-resident taxpayers we've heard from today, Joan Taylor, John Delano. And the challenge to you is to look at the tax assessor's file and try to make some progress on coming up with a definition that we all can agree upon in terms of the retrospective record of property ownership that would distinguish properties that have transacted in the last 2 years from someone to a commercial entity, and those that represent everyone who has been the same owner for more than 2 years or more than 3 years. I think you'll find that's a way to honor and respect those of us who, like myself, once were Nantucketers by choice, but hadn't yet lived here year-round as legal residents. That can be done with the data we have. And if you can come up with a technical definition, I think you will have come up with something that will work in the way that we all intend it to work, and we'll leave the rest to the lawyers to fight it out in court.
Thank you, Peter. Edward, if we could.
Yeah, I'll just go back to what I said. I think I found that if you search under the acts of 2018, this is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, chapter 337. It's somewhat lengthy, but and I'm trying to give you some more specificity here, but if you scroll down, you're going to find section 13, I think it is. 14. Thank you. And section 14 basically starts spelling out a city or town by ordinance or by law may regulate operators registered pursuant, blah, blah, blah. And there's about 5 or 6 subsections. It's quite, as I said, it's quite extensive. So that's, I think, where the state foundation for regulating short-term rentals lay. And so anyhow.
Good, thank
that's
you.
My 2 cents.
More than that, it might even be worth a whole nickel.
I'll take it.
Good. Now, the schedule, I am shutting this down. The schedule says other citizens' petitions. We've had no indication that anybody else wants to speak. I found the discussion on short-term rental very, very illuminating. So one more time, anybody else with an article that was not on the schedule? I'm not going to give you a lot of time to respond because I'm not seeing any indication. Peter Morrison, co-president of the Nantucket Civic League. Will you do the honors of shutting this down?
I will do the honors. Your co-presidents and your members of the Civic League are determined to beat this thing into submission, and I'm glad we had a long time to go into this today. I just want to tell you that we have an aspirational plan, aspirational as of last night, to have the panel discussion that we had hoped to have today integrated with our forum, which is scheduled to be meet the candidates literally days before annual town meeting. And we ask you to be patient until we worked out the details. If we can make that work, we're going to try to beat this thing into submission with one more go around of having a panel discussion where we can talk about this and make everybody understand what's at issue and what might be ways forward on these three articles that we've just discussed today. So stay tuned and watch for the announcements about what we will do as best we can with our volunteer organization. And thank you all for attending and staying on board with this.
I just want to say, Peter, we've had well over 50 people participating, almost 60, 43 at the peak on attendees and 13 or 14 panelists. Everybody is thanked for the time they've given. Go out and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you all.